Yes, please silence.
I did. I don't understand what's going on.
May I?
I mean, I can turn it down, but.
Thank you. I love the intro.
That was a place I went to yesterday.
Great introduction.
This introduces this morning's panel, the first panel of Saturday. Welcome everybody. This panel is titled "When We Get to Space, What Will Family Look Like?" Individuals may explore space, but it will take families to settle there. We'll be both talking about the realities of today and the visionaries that our generations of science fiction authors imagined what we'll be doing with space, what we'll be doing with families, and I'll be helping reconcile that. I'm Glenn Olson. I had a previous career in a fire department. I was a paramedic. I was a fire captain. I had a side gig as a midwife, all of which gave me great cachet to write science fiction.
How many babies did you deliver?
I only delivered 16. Actually, I was an attendant at birth. The ladies in question did all the hard work.
16. I was up to 16.
I've also been a historian of the polyamory movement for a number of years, and been a participant in SANE, and with my co-author Terry, whom I'll introduce in a moment. We recently brought out a book called 50 Years of Polyamory in America, a guided tour of a growing movement, and it's doing fairly well in colleges and other places. And this is Terry Lee Russell Rogers, my co-author, and also someone who's been in science fiction probably since science fiction was invented.
Well, no, not quite. This is 1969, probably.
It seems so long ago. So please tell us about yourself, Terry.
Well, I am the founder of Live the Dream, which is an organization of people interested in locally committed relationships, group marriage, and group living. I have the oldest continuing nest of Church of All Worlds, founded by O'Bronzell here, which is based on the one in Stranger in a Strange Land, and that nest has been going on since 1988, so it's pretty exciting. We meet regularly on third Saturdays of the month. I'm a hypnotherapist, and I also ran marriage-minded introductions for 40 years, my family's matchmaking service, and we'll be talking more about that on the panel on why is fandom mostly male, which I'm not sure is quite true anymore, by the way.
Thank goodness.
Mostly can be 51%.
Yeah.
So when I was 15, 16 years old, I called myself a Jewish Hylenian, and I am now Judeo-Pagan, and it's the same thing because it's all based on Stranger in a Strange Land.
Thank you, Jerry. Sir Gerald, please tell us about yourself.
Now, he promised we're not going to call anybody sir here. He's a fire captain. I'm an ex-Air Force major. Okay, I'm Gerald Nordley. I write science fiction as G. David Nordley. And I've done a number of pieces of short fiction concerning families in space. You'll find A Life on Mars and Comet Gypsies and The Day of Their Coming in this one. That's after the Vikings. And on Prelude to Stars, you'll find and I wrote it down, but I didn't write it down. Anyways, asteroid home stories. Let me see, Ellis's Asteroid, for instance, and This Old Rock. This Old Rock is a story about a housing inspection in the asteroid belt. So,
I didn't read that.
Yeah.
So, I do those, and I spent time in the Air Force, 20 years plus, astronautical engineer, and also involved in a number of space organizations and such, so including the Highland Society and that kind of thing. So that's enough on me.
Oh, okay, thank you, David. We have a couple of special guests here this morning in the front row. We've got a man that has corresponded a number of times with Heinlein and probably argued philosophy with him, and took a lot of what Heinlein wrote and turned it into an actual church, the Church of All Worlds. This is over on Zell Ravenheart.
First neo-pagan religion
There indeed, yes.
in the United States.
And a representative of the Heinlein Society, Mike Sheffield. Mike, I have to ask, to be a member in good standing of the Heinlein Society, would I have to wear a kilt?
It wouldn't hurt, but no. It's not a requirement.
But you always wear one. It must be required.
See, the people we admire, we strive to be like. So there we go. Okay, thanks. So let me just lay a little groundwork here. I went on the NASA website in June and I did a little bit of research and I found out, well, how have people been surviving in space? And we got a little bit of data finally after having people go into space for all these many years. More than 600 people have spent time in low Earth orbit or above. Altogether, the people have racked up 29,000 person days, or that would be 77 years of life. They've all come back, and after being extensively examined over and over again, have returned to pretty normal lives, being pretty normal human beings. The 17 of the female astronauts have gone on to get pregnant and have perfectly normal children. A whole phalanx of male astronauts have come home and littered more children. So we know that visiting space is successful, and you can come back to this planet and lead a pretty ordinary life, or a pretty normal life. So we can visit space. What will it look like when we live there? One question is, will nuclear families be the best option for space? Are there any other options? So start off with, Terry, how would you like it?
If we look at space, including other planets, as more dangerous than the Earth conditions we are naturally suited to, the nuclear family would not be the best option. Even on Earth, a child can be orphaned by his parents getting killed in a car accident or on a plane. Couples usually travel together, so if one is killed, likely they both will be. Such extended family as grandma and grandpa or aunts and uncles may be available to raise the child, or may live so far away the child hardly knows them. One of Heinlein's reasons for presenting the multi-generational group marriage as an ideal way to raise children is that 6 or 7 fathers and 6 or 7 mothers, like in Who's a Harsh Mistress, the death of a biological parent, while a tragedy, is not anything like the kind of disaster it can be in a nuclear family. According to research done by Omni magazine back in the 1980s, the higher the ratio of adults to children raising them, the higher their average intelligence is likely to be. Also, parents with diverse sets of knowledge to expose those children to would give them an advantage in keeping the colony on a planet or the crew of a space station surviving and thriving, especially if they are unexpectedly on a planet like in Darkover.
I'll get to that later.
Okay. Let's see.
We've learned to write cheat sheets. Don't mind us.
Okay. This is yours, so I'm going to say I'm
Thank
done
you.
with what I
Thank you,
just
Terry.
said.
David, you want to take a swing at the question?
Okay. I think I actually wrote the panel description. That's I didn't anticipate it going in this direction, and it's an interesting direction. Yeah. One of the things I would, for nuclear families or any other, let me go to my own family history, which Norwegian immigrants and Englishmen and so on, and times are tough, and sometimes you have to make adjustments. And my great-grandmother, Nordley, she was born Matilda Andersdottir, and she had 13 children, including 2 sets of twins. And she outlived my great-grandfather by several years. On the other side, Captain John Ireland married a Norwegian belle, and they ended up maybe about halfway through the marriage splitting up, because he went over to the West Coast here to try and make a family, all of that, and was so successful, but his wife raised the kids that were still here, including my grandmother, and she was one of the early ones, and then she died, and she basically took the youngest child and raised the youngest child. So she was a single mother working as a teacher in northern Minnesota, and she ran into my grandfather, who just buried the family. The point of that is that the nuclear family paradigm was not really always what happened in the frontier. You had life intervene, and you had a lot of such, people made adjustments. Siblings raised their younger siblings. Aunts raised their sisters or brothers' siblings. And a lot of that goes on, and flexibility is required, and I don't see it being too much different in space, though I think perhaps even with modern medicine and all of the technology we have and whatnot, it'll be a little bit easier on people.
That's kind of the extended family, the extended family,
Yeah.
while polyamory has the expanded family, which
Yeah.
basically mimics what you're talking about.
Yeah, you get probably the same dynamics. Anyway, since I'm an astronautical engineer, a brief comment is that I think long-term habitats in space will be spinning for some gravity. We had a little discussion about that earlier. I'm not sure exactly how much is needed. It may be as little as 1/10 of a G. It may be as much as 1/3 of a G or something like that. But and there will be there are things like airlocks and all sorts of stuff that will be 21st, 22nd century technology, which is a lot different than technology on the prairie, but you still have to know it. And there will be a premium on smarts, because the unsmart aren't going to survive very well out there. Okay, let me leave it at that for now.
If you're clumsy.
Since you have this question, and we don't have another panelist here, perhaps we'll have a time to answer it.
Oh, yes. Oberon, if you don't mind, we'll ask you that question also. Are nuclear families, you've done a lot of studying and a lot of spiritual work, are nuclear families the best option in space, or what are the other options that you've seen or read about?
Well, the nuclear family option is not even the norm, really, in here. Up until after World War II, the typical American family consisted of multi-generational people all living together. You'd have your primary couple and their kids, but you'd also have, Uncle Fester and Grandma Ma, Lurch the butler, all living together. The Adams family was the typical American family in the 100 years ago. So generally families have a kind of accreted, people all just coming together to live together, thinking of themselves as a family. Whether it was involved a formal marriage or not vary from culture to culture, but the isolation of the post-World War II nuclear family, suburban, ticky-tacky, Levittown neighborhoods was an invention. It was an invention. It was not like your typical normal family. So in a situation of colonization of a new place, like colonizing the Americans, or the people who lived in communities, the tribal societies where they weren't transient. The thing that has made the difference is the transience of so many people. Immigrants who came over to this country, they were isolated from their home country, their communities, their people. But in the old country, everybody knew everybody. You would have small little villages and communities where everybody interacted.
So children were raised by the village.
And children were raised by the village. And they say it takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a Viking to raise a village. Keep that in mind, referencing your Viking there. I think when we're dealing with colonizing other worlds and living in space and stuff, that we will just see a natural assemblage of people thinking of themselves as families. Marriage per se may not be the essential ingredient. The essential ingredient will simply be people who think of themselves as a family. In the Church of All Worlds, we have that kind of concept of nests to a great extent. You get a bunch of people that way. In my personal experience, I was involved in 2 group marriages expanding over 20 years of the 40 years that Morning Glory and I had together. And we raised 4 kids collectively within 2 group marriages, one of 4 adults and the other one of 5. And they still, all years later, after people had departed and Morning Glory died and stuff like that, the kids still think of themselves as brothers and sisters. We now have grandchildren, in the situation, and it all worked perfectly. It was great. Having multiple parents and multiple lines of responsibility, it seems like a natural way to do it. It wasn't like something that was artificially designed and created and blueprinted. It's just kind of accumulated.
Yes, thank you. I want to expand on that, and I'm going to introduce our 4th panelist in just a moment, if you'll forgive me, Christopher. I want to the definition of family. Very good. It might not include marriage. It might include other bonds. This is, it turns out that there is a commission in the UN that has been struggling with the definition of family for several years now, because what a family is culturally identified in so many ways. And so the Commission has tried and failed to come up with a definition that would be acceptable to 177 member countries of the UN. This is the closest they've gotten to. The broad definition of family is a family is a unit of 2 or more persons united by marriage, blood, adoption, or consensual union, in general constituting a single household, interacting and communicating with each other, and possibly sharing a common kitchen and financial resources on a regular basis. That's all they could, put it all together. Two or more individuals, we could have 12. But what is key is that it's family because they're sharing resources. They probably have common philosophies, although the UN doesn't get into that. Having been in family situations where we did not have a common philosophy, I'll go, maybe doesn't belong in this definition. But so if the UN's been struggling with it, and several generations of science fiction authors have been struggling with it, we're probably not going to solve it today, but we're going to see what kind of roads people have taken or are imagining to take. And now, if I may, I want to introduce our 4th panelist, Christopher Carlson. Would you please? I'm Glenn Olson. This is Joel Nordley, Terry Lee Brussel Rogers, and we talked yesterday a little bit. Would you please tell us about yourself?
Well, I have to apologize to you all. I'm not going to apologize to Arlene, because I told Arlene that putting me on a program item before noon was likely to have bad consequences. I thought I would just be fuzzy-headed. I didn't realize I'd completely... I was convinced this was at 11, and About 10:05, I thought, wait a second, and checked my schedule and Anyway, so the first thing you need to know about me is that I'm not a morning person. I once, in fact, terrified a nurse who tried to take my vital signs at about 7:30 a.m. So yeah, but yes.
Accepted.
Oh dear.
Oh, dear.
Oh dear. Oh dear. But no, I come to this question primarily as an aspiring space colonist and someone who's been thinking about how are we going to live in space for a long time. Just the thought of trying to come up with a uniform definition of family and getting close to, well, you share meals. I mean, I will argue, of course, a lot of people like to think of family in the form of, marriage and sex and procreation and things like that. I will argue that food is probably more fundamental for most people than sex is. And it's often harder to get along with someone who's a bad cook. I am reminded. So one of the ways that I think about space settlement a lot is, it's not fashionable these days to talk about the westward expansion of America or whatever. But the truth is, one of the phenomena that occurs in the 19th century, early 20th century, in the United States and Canada particularly, and still to this day in some places, is utopic communities, people who have some very specific idea of how human society ought to be organized, and they go off into the wilderness somewhere to try and found that and do it. And most of these ended in abject failure. I want to be very clear on this. Most of these, so Laura Ingalls Wilder, let's see, no, is that right?
Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah, okay, you think of that, right? Okay, so, that's sort of the mildest. That's sort of the mildest form of it, right? But Louisa May Alcott, you remember for Little Women, I'm sure. What you don't remember is her book entitled Transcendental Wild Oats, which is the narrative of how her father, Bronson Alcott, and several other people tried to create an agrarian commune in western Massachusetts and damn near starved to death because none of them knew the least thing about farming. And they were, they were city merchants, and they got tired of what they were doing, and so they would just stop and not do it. Or they would, try to shove the burden off on the women of their community who were already doing all the things that they could do. Anyway, most utopian settlements were failures in one way or another. And others of them, their problem was just that the frontier of settlement caught up to them. And they weren't able to live in their own way because they were now surrounded by people who didn't interact that way. And so I can see space colonies are going to be something which really appeal to people of the utopian kind. The problem is, most of their systems are not going to work. Most of the things that people come up with when they say, this is how people ought to live, and I'm going to prove it. 4 or 5 years later, as it turns out, that was not the way that people ought to live. And, if you're lucky, you survive the experience. So that's a perspective that I think about because, ultimately, and pretty much every utopian community has its own form of this. I mean, ultimately, you could think of the family, whatever it really is, as the atomic unit of society. We're accustomed to thinking of the individual, right? The individual, one human being, as being the atomic unit of society. But this may be wrong, right? It may be that the individual, the human person, has characteristics which are more like a proton or an electron. In other words, doesn't really make up an atom, doesn't interact in the same way. Whereas it's possible, and I put this to you for your judgment, for your consideration, that the family is at the minimum like a crystalline subunit. In other words, if you think about mineralogy, you can't tell anything about a mineral by naming the atoms it's comprised of. Sure, it's got silicon in it. Sure, it's got oxygen in it. Sure, it's got magnesium in it. Sure, it's got iron in it. But if you say, oh, well, it's got a face-centered cubic structure, suddenly you know a lot more about that mineral. Once you know what the repeating unit is, you know how those repeating units assemble together, and you can say, oh, well, this is going to be very brittle, or this is going to have marked cleavage planes.
And will you pull that into what human beings deal with each other, and for a moment, and then we'll go on to our next question.
Okay. If I might mention, and I have it on my notes here, we talked about stranger in a strange land and that kind of thing. But Heinlein experimented with other kinds of families. One of them is a sort of a collective family that was a trading starship and a citizen of the galaxy, Finnish descended, and how that worked, and you have to be very collective there. But there was also the Rolling Stones, where the kind of libertarian type family took off, bought a spaceship, and headed for Mars to make a fortune selling flat hats. and that was I think one thing about the universe and space and going out there is that there's going to be room for all of these.
Mm-hmm.
There's not going to be one thing that people do. There will be this and that and other utopian communities in their minds and so on. And because of the technology we're developing, they'll have an easier time of it than they did on the prairie in North Dakota and so on. You have a rock, an asteroid full of regolith and all of that, and as long as you have a source of water somewhere, you can make stuff grow, and get your robots to do stuff. So I think that's a very for people who like to get away and not necessarily be hedged in by a community. Space is going to be a paradise for them.
Calling it sort of a new frontier. I'm glad you brought up the Rolling Stones and other things like that. Because my next question for our panelists is what type of families does your favorite author show in space? And if I may, I'll just boldly roll in with the Rolling Stones with you. What I liked about the Rolling Stones as I got older was not just that it was an extended family. You had the grandmother, you had the parents, you had the twins, Romulus and Remus, and and they were all very bright people. Pollux and Castor. Yeah.
Castor.
Yeah, they were always Romulus and Remus to me. But one thing that that on rereading I went, oh my God, Heinlein invented remote work. So the spaceship and the trip is funded by the dad's job. The dad sells soap opera,
Space opera.
Yeah, makes a space opera, sells soap opera to Earth, and he gets paid, and he can write those anywhere in the solar system he is. And I go, wow, the first remote work, Heinlein invented it.
Well, I think you need to go back and look at The Machine Stops by E.M. Forster, which I'm sure Heinlein read, and he adopted remote work. And another thing I wanted to bring up in this connection, since we're talking about families, is remote education.
Remote education.
And it leaves a bad taste in people's mouths because of how badly it was managed during the pandemic. But if you go back to Australia and the Outback, and they did it with radio, and those kids did actually better on average than several studies. So I don't think one should be that worried about remote educate and just growing up in a family as opposed to with a whole bunch of other people around.
Being in a space colony means they won't be left behind and be country hicks these days.
Absolutely, even a one spaceship space colony. Yeah.
So the Rolling Stones still, mother, father, 4 children, Grandma Hazel. Their concerns for each other's survival helps keep them alive. Mother, being a doctor, made them stand out as she helps keep lots of other people alive as well during an epidemic on another ship and on the asteroids. The financial contributions of the father working remotely brings in the money, which Hazel takes over when he becomes bored with it, and the twin teenagers' attempts at becoming traders all helps make their ship in space, ending in heading for Hazel's dream of seeing the rings of Saturn. Fast forward a couple thousand years to Lazarus Long's Tertius Colony family, which eventually includes most of the major characters in the previous books, including Hazel. This is a multi-generational group marriage, somewhat like the one Hazel was brought up in, see Lose Her Harsh Mistress, except it's much larger. Everyone in the marriage is committed to loving and helping to raise all the children underfoot and in the womb at the time of the marriage until said children are adults, whether those children are genetically those of the men in the marriage or not. This particular family runs a rejuvenation clinic, an excellent hospital, which is certainly a profit-making business. The Davis farming tunnels in Luna's Harsh Mistress, and the beauty parlor run by one of the Davis wives, also brings in what it takes for a comfortable family lifestyle. Manny's statement that when he died, the best part of him would go on as the marriage would outlast his passing, being added to as its members pass on the current spouses, find more love to bring home. Marion Zimmer Bradley's Dark Over Landfall gives us a society in which a limited gene pool made it a woman's duty and privilege to have children by as many men as possible, who were then raised by she, her primary partner, and the whole village. Nothing very nuclear about any of this, though Rolling Stones did not mention anything non-monogamous being a juvenile. If Grandma Hazel was ever monogamous, her adventures in Heinlein's adult books did not indicate it.
Thank you. So, we've talked a little bit about the...
Do I get to answer?
Yeah,
Wait a minute.
that's right.
What's your name again?
Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. You may have heard of my music.
Oh, my God. I've been messing with him all during the convention. I apologize, ladies and gentlemen. Go right ahead.
No, it's gotten used to not hearing from me because I wasn't here until a minute ago. But, this is me arriving in a puff of smoke. And I just wanted to build on something Jerry mentioned, actually, which is he was talking about the trading ship in Citizen of the Galaxy. And one of my favorite SF writers, although she's better known for fantasy probably, C.J. Cherry, really expands on that. Right. So she's got multi-generational trading ships. That the entire trading ship is a family. And just
Citizen of the Galaxy, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Is she goes into it. She doesn't just visit one briefly. She sets entire novels on them. Finity's End is kind of a favorite of mine, although there is a terrible plot hole in it that I'm not going to tweak her nose about. But anyway, the thing is that the traders, the merchanters, as they're known, right, they have ships. The ship is the family, in a sense. Everyone on board the ship is family, and because you're all in each other's pockets at all times. There's no other possibility. And because of the nature of what they do, there's no... The sort of heredity and marriage customs, they have a completely separate set of customs where essentially the women of the ship, basically everybody goes on leave when they get into a port, and they meet up with other merchanters and sleep around, basically, and whatever children are born are the children of their mothers and the children of the ship. That the family identity is tied up completely with the living situation. And to leave the ship is unthinkable. So you have this, so in the novel Finity's End, it's told from the perspective of someone who is in the worst possible position because his mother had to leave the ship, that she was pregnant and the ship was going into a combat zone. And so they left her behind on a station. And they didn't come back for years and years and years and years. And now they're back. And they assume that it's their right to just pick him up and bring him on board because that, from their point of view, that's his identity. But he's never been on the ship. He's never known any of them. He's never met any of them except his mother, who was drugged out of her mind and died before he was 5 years old. He has no anchor to the community that they assume he's an integral part of, because their whole worldview is tied up in the ship, and he is a child of the ship. He's theirs, and he doesn't feel it.
Excuse me, did he have, so his mother jumping and dead, did he have a community or anything that he was an integral part of on the space station?
So his problem is the closest, so he gets bounced around from basically one foster care setting to another, and the closest thing he finds to a community is in the people who are the research scientists on the planet that the station circles. So he's not just station raised, he's actually attached to a planet, which is the completely opposite end, ethically, intellectually, from the people on the ship. And they just...
What's the name of this book?
Infinity's End.
How did she resolve it? Just real quick.
Read that.
Well, the short answer is it's not completely resolved, because, which I think is a very realistic ending, actually, for the story, but that the main character develops a strong attachment to the younger generation on the ship, many of whom, because of basically relativistic time lag, right, the youngest kids on the ship were actually born shortly before he was, but they seem younger anyway, and he winds up being sort of a protector figure for them, and so he starts building his own community inside the larger community of the ship. And it ends on sort of an open note, which, as I say, I think is realistic for a story about people.
It does seem fairly positive. Yes.
Well, these discussions of how in different novels this whole issue has been treated, and it raised the whole question of the function of this panel, is how is family defined and how is that played out in various fictional treatments. And it's brought me back to thinking of Stranger in a Strange Land, is that the main hero, as it were, Valentine Michael Smith, who is his family? I mean, he was the product of the first human expedition to Mars, in which everybody's killed, but they had signed a compact of interconnectedness and mutual agreement, almost as a family, but they all died. And he was raised by indigenous Martians, which are sort of like animate mushrooms, And so that's not really his family, because he's a human being, sort of. I mean, physically, anyway, but as he states, not mentally.
Yeah, that's what makes him the stranger.
To Earth, where his genetic heritage is, but who is his family? And yet there was this drive to somehow congregate family.
He built his own family, basically.
Right, so he builds his own family through the process of water sharing.
Yes.
And so water brothers, as it were, become brothers and sisters in truth here. And I think we have to look at it that way. The concept of creating family is more and more what we're seeing in our contemporary society, as people get together with other people and form bonds where we say, like, water is thicker than blood. Many of us do not really have the same bonds with our blood family that we have found with the families by association and choice that we have, especially as many people have diverged in their own personal life from the standards or the lifestyle, whatever, of their parents and family, and rejected thereby, and outcast. And so we've developed new families of outcasts, like the clan of the cave bear kind of a thing. Anyway, just...
In Clark's
Fred had something.
I want to know the author of the book you were talking about.
C.J. Cherry. Cherryh.
And the lady in the back. You had a...
Oh, I was just going to add that the Valentine Michael Smith family, they didn't just die, they killed each other.
Right.
So that was...
Well, one did, the others died in other ways.
Okay.
And then he spent the rest of the book explaining why this is a very bad idea to bring into space nuclear families that are jealous like that. Okay.
Was that your point?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, if I might point out Clark's Songs of Distant Earth. We have another ship that has essentially become a family in how it interacts with the colony world. And, relationships form and get broken again.
Craig.
I'd like to recast Oberon's remarks.
You need his permission first.
So And Glenn's remarks, you brought up the UN report defining things that a family shares: the kitchen and resources, eating together, finances. In space, they're sharing air and water. This has been mentioned, that they're living in a spaceship is a family. The defining functions there is that they're routinely sharing each other's air and water. So if we add that to the UN list, maybe we can say any community where people routinely are sharing air and water is a family. And Earth is a very dysfunctional, very large family.
Well, the spider takes care of that later.
And the lady behind you.
Not to derail this, but would anyone mind if I close the back door? There's been a lot of loud conversations.
Oh, sorry, please do.
Going on.
Thanks for bringing that to our attention. I'd like to, okay, one more question, and then I want to throw a question to Gerald.
Similar to the trading type family, where it's not so much the ship, it's that they have many ships in a big trading family, is Elizabeth Moon's Zavada's War Series, where that's a big extended family across most of that known area universe there, working as one trading group. And the whole storyline is what happens when they get attacked and most of them wiped out, and the youngest one has to be the one to take over everything.
Yeah, that's, I guess you can do that with faster than light drive. You can do something similar if you restrict it to the asteroid belt.
Yeah. I want to throw a question to Gerald and then to everybody. You had mentioned about you think that space habitats would be spun for a little bit of gravity, maybe as low as 1/10. And actually, one of the questions here is, what are some of the challenges that space families will face? Larry Niven thought in his books about the inhabitants of the asteroid belt that they would take an asteroid and spin it up to 1 gravity, so that women who are with child could actually have their child under 1 gravity. He called it confinement asteroid for reasons. But you want to talk about that problem with families?
Because well, first, that particular solution is unlikely. And that's because asteroids turn out to be basically rubble piles held together, just with
Van der Waals forces.
Van der Waals forces or very, very low gravity or whatnot. What you will have to do is build a can of sufficient diameter and spin it. And your robots will be able to do that for you. They'll be able to go in there, separate the elements they need, and print it out and do that. But yeah, you will have rotating living quarters and probably sleeping quarters, and you'll also probably have zero-G things. This is what people have been thinking about in terms of space stations and space colonies for a long time now.
Babylon 5.
Yeah, that's the other thing, radiation. Let me go to the gravity thing. Now, you can go, outside the box there with somebody like Lois McMaster Bujold, who said, okay, we handle that with genetic engineering. For instance, for your first 9 months, you don't experience any gravity really, or, so what, why should it be a problem when you're older? Anyways, what? No, this is falling free.
Oh, yes, well, that's part of
Which was later dovetailed into the Vorkosigan stories, but by a later novel, but written as a standalone.
Yeah. Anyways, and
Triplanetary, anybody.
And that sort of approach to radiation is also possible. We know things like radiodurans, and they're very radiation tolerant, and you may be able to genetically engineer radiation tolerance into the human species. But if not, you can put a wire around your habitat and run a current through it and create your own magnetosphere. So that, you can do that too. And also, you need an energy source. We are, used to be thinking that you couldn't go beyond Mars with solar power. Well, we're doing solar power in Jupiter orbit now. You just need to have a big enough solar cells, and if you don't want it all to do with the solar cells, you can make really thin mirrors and concentrate. So I did that in Haumea. I talked about a space colony with a really big thin mirror out, in the Oort cloud.
Didn't O'Neill calculate one of his back-of-the-envelope calculations that you could get up past Pluto before the mass of the mirror exceeded the mass of the habitat?
In 1976. Yeah.
All very rough estimates.
Yeah.
Okay. So we found out that it's going to be possible to survive in space. We want to have our rotate all the three generations of science fiction authors, starting with, well, not E. Smith, because he had artificial gravity, but
with Tsiolkovsky, who wrote science fiction, and they introduced the space station in his, before 1900.
And even then, okay. So what other challenges will our space families face? So we've got abandonment in a foreign culture. We've got the problems of childbirth and child-rearing if it's not in weightless conditions might not be good for that, or we don't know. What else?
I get a chance? Sometimes family power struggles, such as father grounding the teenage twins for leaving a dysfunctional space scooter where their grandmother would take it for a safe means of transit and nearly die in it with their struggling younger brother, could have actually killed both of them had the boys not rebelled by going out and rescuing her anyway. This is all family structure. Heavy-handed father also appeared in Farnham's Freehold, which doesn't strictly apply to this planet where they travel in time rather than space. And then the others.
Oh.
Yeah. I was kind of, I think sociologists would point to lack of socialization and lack of peers of the same age for a lot of the small family things we've been talking about. I go backwards in time to, when we had very small tribes or maybe even just a couple of people and their kids and all of that and living off the land and going around, and they seem to manage it. So I think we have like half a million years at least of evolution as human beings, and it's winnowed out a lot of the inflexibility in terms of that, because we are the survivors of some really hard stuff, and we're flexible and we're creative and we're there's another Heinlein quote, specialization is for ants.
For insects.
Yeah.
We're survivors, really. Yeah. Chris?
Oh gosh. So, all right. Well, what I was going to say has just gone completely out of my head. Go me. I was going to say something along the lines, I guess, that, of course, space colonies, the environment, in other words, is sort of. Oh well. First, I'm going to say, is anyone besides me hopefully familiar with a book entitled Interstellar Migration and the Human Experience? It was the report of a conference held at Los Alamos back in the early 80s, and it covers some of these topics, and it's well worth reading. I'll just encourage you all to read it if you can find a copy. My copy is a library discard. Libraries have been discarding some very good books lately, and I don't like that.
It's still in my library,
Good.
so it's around.
Good. But
Are you a librarian?
No,
Your personal library?
no, the library that I frequent.
but
That is good to know.
I find myself evolving into a librarian, although that's my sibling who has the library science degree. But that's the thing, is that a space colony, because of its physical constraints, is likely to enforce a communitarian attitude. But as we've seen from Earth history, there are lots and lots of different flavors of communitarianism. Stalinist Soviet Union was officially communitarian. It was also a horror show of the greatest proportions. And so we can certainly envision, yes, the idea of, well, one person is going to make all the decisions here because that's efficient. And oh boy, does that have some amazing failure modes. Oh boy, does that break down. Because as it turns out, just in a, no matter what your social concepts are, people are ultimately autonomous. And in order for people to do anything useful or pleasant or productive or any of those other things, any of those positive adjectives that we might associate, people have to make their own decisions moment by moment about what they're going to do. This has been the failure of, this has been the biggest failure mode in mechanized industry. People are recently been talking about the General Motors sit-down strikes of the 1930s, and the United Auto Workers, their main demand was that workers be allowed to talk to each other, not when working, during lunch. They were forbidden from talking to each other during their lunch break because that would distract them from the rigidly pre-programmed way of acting that management wanted them to have. And that's...
If I can bring that to this thought, you're saying that any human society that we have out in space is going to have is going to deal with politics as well as family issues.
Right.
And
especially if they get to be larger.
And politics emerges in families.
yeah.
Now, politics emerges ultimately, I think, from a family setting. You've got, what if little sister decides you're stupid? As they often do.
It all begins with the family. Thank you, Chris. At this point, we have been not getting very many questions from the audience. We haven't been asking for them. Anyone from the audience have a question for our panel?
Yeah, so currently, NASA is discouraging the idea of coupling on the International Space Station. However, they did get a set of twins up there. So, how is NASA feeling about that in the upcoming moving towards the moon and moving towards Mars?
Yeah, NASA's attitude in general is to bury their head under the pillow.
Yeah, that's what I thought they were going to say.
NASA is not looking...
Well, they should look at the Star Dancer series by Spider Robinson.
Well, NASA is not interested in meeting these issues head on. And that, I think, is a really big problem. A rather nasty little story, which most people today would probably think, ugh, is Larry Niven's How the Heroes Die. But it represents a really big problem that could emerge if you have somebody sending people on a mission to Mars and absolutely bound and determined to be certain that, oh no, nothing is going to happen. Things are going to happen. And if you don't have a framework in place within which those things can happen, people are going to get killed.
Because human beings are human beings.
Yeah.
Gerald, did you want to take a...
Well, to that, my story, Martian Valkyrie, and after the Vikings is sort of the case of that thing. Things go wrong with the big UN, international expedition, and the small Norwegian expedition kind of saves the day. But the politics and there are going to be, this isn't going to be a one solution sort of thing. People will come up with their own cultural, norms and things to enforce and to teach and so on, and you will have different things in different places, different just as you have on Earth or had before the West started, going all over the world and interacting with everybody.
Well, it's remarkable, the Republic of India has no marriage laws. People forget that. India is such a heterogeneous country with so many different cultural groups who have different definitions. The Republic of India does not legally have marriage.
It's
I
all
believe
in the
that
culture.
they've actually recently been formulating marriage laws.
And
I'm sure that the BJP government wants to have uniformity because uniformity is pretty much their fetish, but so far it's may it long continue to evade them.
if you say you're married, you're married. Okay, there we go. Any other questions?
Chris, did you have a question, honey? No. Okay. Anybody else have a question? No. All right.
Okay.
Oh, yes, Owen.
It does seem that with all of this conversation around trying to codify what marriage is supposed to be structured, that we could just leave that alone and just say family is people who call themselves family and consider themselves to be family. What more is required than that? Really, I mean, that would seem to be the fundamental issue. You know, nobody else really has any right or necessity for trying to define what that should be for other people.
When we had our nest meeting Wednesday night, all the people there were part of my family, even though most of them didn't live in the same place. They're still family, just like my brother and my sister and nieces and nephews that don't happen to live under my roof.
I mean, it becomes to some extent a problem when you have groups of people with different definitions of what family is interacting. You know, where do the interfaces look like? You know, and there are, to pop over this field of space systems engineering for a moment, I think there may be an analogy to be found in the fact that some engineering documents, they don't define what's in a system, they define what the interfaces are so that you can connect it with other adjoining systems. They don't say you've got to have, such and such low dropout voltage regulator, such as, no, they say the connectors have to be like this, the voltages have to be like this, it has to support this interaction with these other things at higher levels of abstraction. And it's possible that the only really working definition of a family is going to be one that says, all right, this is a unit, we don't know what's inside the unit, we don't know how the unit is constructed internally, but we can define how it interacts with other units, which are also defined as families.
Excellent, Ross. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Any other questions from the audience at the moment?
Well, actually, interestingly, I think your answer answered a question I hadn't asked yet, which really had to do with how would, family versus inheritance kinds of issues change if you were out in space or something. And, if family is just a black box, then I guess, when you get right down to it, things like inheritance would just be whatever's contained in that black box.
In fact, well said. Oberon has, in the real world, had to do that by building his own family. And you did a legal part, and just real quickly, if you tell me how that worked.
Well, yes, the big issue that had been questioned and raised when we started trying to create a practical application of Heinlein's visions was how can you do this legally? And there was all the issue of people wanting to push for legal recognition of multiple partner families and stuff, like gay marriage and all that is an issue. Mm-hmm. And we found a way around that. And there's a model called the Limited Liability Corporation, the LLC.
Yeah.
And all that requires is to have a minimum of 3 people who become the shareholders, essentially, in a corporate structure. And that is exactly a model of the group marriage concept that Heinlein introduced that can be perpetual because the loss of one individual does not lose the whole thing, as a dyad does. You have a dyadic model. If one of them dies or goes away, then you don't have a model.
Family wealth is conserved.
It is. So I think that this is a crucial thing, and we did that. We incorporated our family as a limited liability corporation, and it just continues. Mm-hmm. It just continues going. Our primary initial partner, Morning Glory, died like 9 years ago, and yet the family still continues, and the connections still continue.
And that's great.
Okay, if you get into a situation like, we have our kind of hyper-nuclear family culture here that we inherited from Britain, really, and all of that. And if there isn't an extended family, sometimes there is, but if there isn't, and something goes wrong, who takes care of the orphans, who takes care of the, that sort of thing. And in our society, that falls on the government and I forget the
Eleemosynary institutions?
Well, the not adoption, but the
foster care
system, and all of that, and the stories of the horrors of those systems abound, and societies that they care about personal liberty just as much as anybody else, but they realize the benefit of having a floor below you don't let people sing. That you have at some level a social responsibility to take care of people, and in that, of course, in space where you have much smaller groups of people, of course, that's going to be much more obvious. But we might have something to learn from that.
Yeah, in a space colony, I would say it's sort of a dual problem which makes everything more severe, which is you've got the community is smaller, and although the total resource base is enormous, the available excess resources at any given time are likely to be quite narrow margin. And so it's like, okay, how do we get through this? There's going to be I'm afraid, a lot of experiences where it's like, being somewhere in the far north in midwinter, it's like we've just got to get through this until we can pass through the lean times. I mean, I can't speak to the experience of people who grew up in a hyper-nuclear family or environment. I grew up in a theoretically nuclear family with my mother, who's one of 7 children, her parents across town. I spent as much time with them as I did with my own parents a lot of the time. My father was very, very sick when I was young, and I would have to call the ambulance.
Yeah, you were
right.
by extended
And
family.
then, because Mom was trying to keep him from bleeding to death, I would be the one on the phone to the ambulance, and then my next phone call would be to grandmother, say, "Oh, can you come and pick us? Can you come and pick us up and take us to school?"
Extended families are the mimic.
Yeah,
and in a space environment, we'd be looking at that even more carefully. No, thank you. We actually have a special little moment also in family. One of our co-hosts, Terry is being inducted into lifetime membership for the Heinlein Society, and if you'll indulge us at this moment, we want to give you your certification as a lifetime Heinlein member by a member of the Heinlein Society.
There you are. Your
Lifetime membership with the Heinlein Society.
Just so you can order around here.
Oh, nice. I got a ribbon that says I'm a lifetime member.
Gerald is also a lifetime member of the society.
Gerald. Now she has to defend Heinlein from all comers. Is that right?
Now you're family with Jerry.
Gerald, Terry, your family.
I'm part of my extended family. Yes.
Extended family.
Are you regretting this yet?
And also,
Maybe hold a little higher so we can get the ribbon and the certificate in the shot.
and also another surprise for Terry is that Oberon has come from the Midwest. I'm not sure. Asheville, North Carolina, as the head of the Church of All Worlds, and she's also getting an award as a lifetime member of the Church of All Worlds.
We follow one certificate with another, so that they'll have a match set. Here's Terry's lifetime membership certificate. Terry, congratulations.
Thank you.
May you never thirst.
Thank you all. Last comments, anyone on the panel?
Before we end this, I just want to comment that anybody here who is interested in lifetime membership in the Heinlein Society, very important to preserving the literature of Heinlein, or in Church of All Worlds, very important for preserving his message and his legacy of what he saw a family as being. You should talk to one of these gentlemen or call Church of All Worlds or look it up on the web or the Heinlein Society and make it happen for you.
Okay. Final comments. Chris, final comments.
Right, final comments. Don't put me on the spot here. No, I really think that the true answer to the question in the title of this panel is we'll find out when we get there. People are going to try a lot of things, and a lot of those things are not going to work. Some of those things are going to work really well, and in the middle will probably be most people who will sort of muddle on in a mediocre fashion, which sort of works most of the time. That's our experience of humanity, I think.
Very good. Thank you. Gerald.
Yeah, I should have said my books are available at Cargo Cult in the dealer's room. You go through the door and to your far right. That's not a political comment. That's just where they are on the floor, and you can find them there. Basically to reiterate that there are multiple solutions to the issue of raising people in space, and we'll try a lot of those, and I think a lot of them will succeed.
So we're going to talk
very good.
about this, 50 Years of Polyamory in America, which has, of course, chapter devoted to Heinlein and Church of All Worlds and all of that, as well as the Live the Dream chapter. This is not just a history book. This has some really good stories in it about real people, very exciting stuff. And you can get it, if you've got that blue flyer that I was handing out there, you can get it at 30% off online until November 30th, so we're about at the end of that. Or you can get it up here, which Glenn and I will actually sign to you personally for $32. We'll cover your tax and we'll sign it for you. So,
We'll pay the king's tax.
Yep, we will.
Thank you, what she said. I'm also a science fiction author these days. I'm not in the dealer's room at the moment, sorry, but I'm also can sell them to you, off on a side corridor, like dealing drugs. I find the
is that worth reading? That Desperate Endeavors. I love that. I was one of his beta testers for that, readers for that, and I just couldn't put it down. So even if you were not my best friend and first water brother, I would feel that way about it. It's a good book.
I feel very optimistic about our sojourns into space at this point. Everyone, thanks so much. And thank you all for coming.
You're a wonderful audience, thank you.
I have to say the title 50 Years of Polyamory in America makes me laugh because of something my great-grandmother, who died before I was born, said to one of my aunts back in the 1960s. She remarked that sometime around 1916, when she was newly married, on an army base, you have to be very clear, this was on an army base, there was a household which consisted of 2 officers and the legal wife of one of the officers. And it was very well known there that, half the children were one of the men's and half the children were the other, that they lived as a triad, despite the fact that under the Uniform Code of Military Justice at the time, that was theoretically a death penalty offense.
It is not new. We've just made some new wrinkles there. After all, the French phrase "ménage à trois" means a house of 3.
Yes, people forget that. Ménage means household.
Yes. Well, thank you all.
I just have to ask, though. I recently picked up a book, which is sort of it's the counterpart to your book.
Yes.
In other words, the title of it is Options. It was published in the 70s, and so it's at the beginning of the 50-year span that you have there. I found it interesting, mostly depressing, but interesting.
I am not familiar with that book.
Well, it's mostly it's a book written by some journalist describing mostly a lot of people who tried new things in the form of marriage and family life and not done very well with them.
There is a learning curve, absolutely.